intro music. Yeah! Woohoo!
Hopefully this video will find you well. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at. And today we're going to talk about below deck abilities. Which ones will actually impact your gameplay? Which ones are the best? Which ones are transferable, etc. And try to go over the basics of that. So I'm not going to go over every officer that has a below deck ability. There are a lot of them. But I want to highlight the best ones and if and where you can try to focus on those if that applies. Now, I do want to make a caveat right here at the very beginning that a lot of these officers have got multiple variants, as in this officer does it, and so does this officer. So you don't necessarily have to have all of them at one time. To give an example of that, you have Vielle, who for the most part is like Borg Hugh. The difference being is that she works on armadas and Hugh does not. So keep that kind of in mind. A lot of this is also going to depend on your tiering, where they're at. What's going to be more powerful is generally going to be the one that's tiered up the most, but let's jump into it, talk about it. So we're going to start with PvE officers and take a look at their below deck abilities, and keep in mind that when I'm doing this, we'll do PvP in a minute, we'll talk about loot a little bit, but what I'm doing is trying to make you a better or stronger is a better or more apt way of putting it, because we're trying to help you get a punch up here. So if we're getting more damage, survivability, mitigation stats, whatever that ends up looking like, that's what the goal is, so not including some of the loot ones. But starting off with Pelia, the reason I'm starting with Pelia is because one, she's very, very good, right? So increasing your isolated defense as newer officers come out, there are some that are better. So for example, if you have Wrath of Khan Joachim, he is an immediate replacement for Pelia, as in he's the better version. He also works in PvP and PvE, but most people don't have him yet. He can be found in the Augment faction though, and it can be obtained completely free to play once you get 60 million rep and start doing the Khan's repeatable missions. However, before that, you have ISO Defense with Pelia, and both of them are very good officers and would absolutely recommend you placing them on your ships. Now, Pelia can also be used on the bridge as well, but we're focusing on the below deck ability. You can see maxing out at a 100% ISO defense. New officers will help combat new hostiles. New armadas, new hostiles come in the game, have a lot of ISO baked in, so you want to be able to counter that. Next up, we've got B'Elanna Torres, one of those classic Voyager officers. If you remember, B'Elanna Torres, Neelix, and Harry Kim are all three that we recommend maxing, not only for their below deck ability, because they work in conjunction with other things like the Star Path research. You know, smack that on the screen real quick. So you have the Knock It Down, which is applying hull breach. Very important when combining with this guy right here, Borg Hugh, or just Hugh. So he has the below deck ability of 70% chance to increase critical hit chance by 25% for 2 rounds. And yes, it can stack. So basically turning all your shots into criticals. And then the hull breach, if you remember, is a multiplier. So you have hull breach, then you have a critical 1.5 multiplier minimum with the hull breach. And that's how that's going to expand and escalate your damage. Not including, of course, when you have hull breach, if you've done your Star Path research, that's going to improve your damage as well. You have Harry Kim, same idea, this time with morale. That's going to give you more of that ISO damage thanks to the Star Path research, as well as for ships like the USS Enterprise at level 34, giving it the ability to maintain its shields pretty much at all times when it comes to being a hostile fighter. Only works against hostiles, but still very, very valuable. Get in mind, well, hostiles and armadas, caveat there. Next up, you'll see Hugh, who we just talked about, Nurse Chapel, another big one that I really recommend getting as quickly as possible. My low-level account in the 30s has Nurse Chapel. I've gone after her in the event stores because her below deck ability is ISO Cascade, so good, maxing out at 40%. And there are stronger versions of this existing in the game today. But Nurse Chapel, ISO Cascade as a below deck ability is incredibly valuable, hence why we have it here. I do want to point out when we talk about below deck abilities, the new Wrath of Khan officers that just came out are quite valuable. You'll see one of them here on my screen here in a second, but very valuable. You definitely want that Cascade, but definitely get that one. Then we have a fighting chance. So this is Wrath of Khan Leonard McCoy. So I talked about how you had Pelia, who has a a alternative, which is going to be Joachim. Well, this is Tom Paris's kind of equivalent, which basically what that ends up meaning is you can have one for each. You can have Tom Paris on one hostile ship. You can have Wrath of Khan Leonard McCoy on a hostile ship, boosting your mitigation, with Wrath of Khan Leonard McCoy being a little bit better, especially if you've tiered him up, but a maxed Tom Paris is no slouch and absolutely worth focusing on and going after. And last but certainly not least, on my main hostile crew, we've got Quasi, because so many of these new hostiles have Apex Barrier, and this is giving you Apex Shred. So again, this entire run is made to focus in on just really hyper focus on survivability and better damage creation between the criticals, the ISO, the hull breach, the cascade, as well as intermingling in things like Apex Shred. So here's my primary below deck PvP alignment, and yours might vary and differ, and that's okay. So I have Tuvok, 7 of 9, Ichep, Win DeMarco, Section 31 Jojo, Romy, and then of course, last but not least, Picard Hugh. Now Picard Hugh, interesting to note, and I want to start with him because he works everywhere, right? So at the beginning of each round at combat, repairs 20% of the hull damage taken in the previous round of combat. So it doesn't matter what you're doing. PvP, PvE, this can have value, can help you maybe survive a little bit better, punch up a little bit better, and you get him free to play, grinding the NX01 loop. So for all G4 and above players, pretty easy to access there early on. I've got him there for repairs while we're doing PvP. Romy, kind of similar idea in terms of PvP. We're getting a hull breach. So on round start against players afflicted by hull breach increases your apex barrier by 10,000. Just trying to limit the amount of damage we take. We have Apex Shred, which is another one Jojo, who we just looked at, but we'll bring up again. Very nice to have in terms of a PvP fight because apex barrier becoming more and more prevalent. Gwen DeMarco, who is unarguably one of the best above deck officers, is also the same below deck in PvP, increases isolated cascade in PvP while the enemy has any state, maxing out at 80%, but again, very, very valuable there. Icheb also the same with Cascade, with no state on your ship. For me, giving me 95%. Remember, he's free to play maxable in the Section 31 faction store. So that's very, very nice to be able to go and grab these. Again, if you're interested in PvP, that has a lot of value to me, and I would assume to a lot of folks out there as well. So you have a lot of these, like in the DTI faction I've got added in, like Mazrad Vael, who we'll talk about here in a second. Beer, who is great for below deck loot. You can see right here, the base loot. Now remember, that works on rep, that works on things like the currencies for the augment faction. Very, very good. We come up to Section 31 though, you'll find if we scroll on down, we've got Icheb and a slew of other officers. So able to not only acquire in free to play, but max them out as well. So very, very good there. Moving back on to the below deck slots. What has value? Well, I've got 7 of 9. Kind of a similar idea. We're sticking with Cascade. We're really trying to make those numbers pop. And there are ways to counter this. Again, Wrath of Khan Joaquin, huge for ISO defense, but always good to have more is more. Then we have that right there. Now, this is not my only PvP ship, but that is my #1 loadout. And I have a secondary one as well, which is this one. You'll notice below deck some of the names that you probably would recognize. So for example, we've got Dr. Tiana. She is valuable. Again, ISO defense is good, but a lot of what is valuable to me comes down to the tiering of the officer. This is not easy for everybody to unlock, especially our free-to-play and light spenders, so maybe it's not priority. But if you have her maxed out, absolutely great. I love Kira Nerys as well. Lowering the crit chance of an opponent. This is getting a little less maybe in today's game, but still quite valuable. We also have Phlox, which is going to be a, right there is for the cube cutting beam. Is that the most important thing? Maybe not. But again, if you use your beam, maybe that can have value. I do want to mention Dane, which is a speed boost, which can be very valuable in PvP, but also in PvE just for speeding up, pun intended, all the grinds, because they do take so long at times. And then of course we have the Borg run, which this would include Dazok. It would include all the Borg below deckers for the assimilate ability. I don't really feel like it's very strong in today's game, but it is if you are building multiple ships like for PvP arenas or incursions, it's nice to have. Then I also wanted to follow up by throwing in these as well, which again, they might be a little bit niche value, but still good. Same thing with Enterprise E Troy, niche depending on how quickly you can max her out. And that's so hard in this game to get these officers maxed out, but critical hit damage by 45%, and that goes up and up. You see, I've only got her at tier 3, so tiering that up to make it better. Mazriad Vael, again, one you just saw that we can go after as a free-to-play in the faction stores. So same thing as we're talking about with Hugh. The only reason I use Hugh more, well, simple, because Hugh is higher tiered. Now, there's a slight difference in how this works, because this is based on every time you hit, which if you remember is very similar to Khan's above deck ability. But every time you move, it maxes out at 12%, but 5% for me for 4 rounds, and multiple weapon shots will only trigger it once because you have to have multiple weapons to actually trigger it. But she's very, very valuable, and it gives you another PvE grinder that you can have. Odo, very similar to Enterprise E Troy, where we're talking critical hit damage, just a lower amount because he's an older officer and harder to source. And then you have a wave defense officer in Laliari. Not going to get too deep into the weeds because we have a lot of that. Now, to be clear, things like Divana Tendi Still valuable in today's game. It's just her bonus is now getting more diminished and more diminished as things get added. 215% is nice, but is it game changing? Not anymore. But if you have the below deck spots and maybe you're missing some of the officers that I've highlighted as focal points, worth considering. I do one more time want to point out that some of the newer officers are some of the most valuable officers, even though they're hard to get. And I will focus on Joaquin only because he is 100% free to play. I think those type of things are valuable, worth calling out. Now, I am 7 shards away from here. And again, you can get him by doing your cons repeatable missions at 60 million rep. But his below deck ability is increasing your isolated defense tier 1 at 100%. So immediately getting better than Pelia, like from the get-go, we're tied with her 500% at max. And again, works in all situations. Savick below decks against non-Armada hostiles, increase your ISO cascade. So similar to what we were just talking about with Nurse Chapel. But Savick, again, can get much, much bigger depending on what tier you have her. Very valuable as a below deck. Wrath of Khan Montgomery Scott is interesting. He's not bad by any means, but not as valuable as the previous 2 we just looked at, in my opinion. Carol Marcus, which as we know is improving our shield mitigation. Again, another one that's solid, strong, maybe not a priority. A lot of this is going to come down to tiering. Last but not least, Wrath of Khan McCoy, who I already have replacing Tom Parrish you see on the primary. So lots of good below deck officers there. In terms of sourcing, you're going to get your lower decks officer sourced pretty easily through your Cerritos sloop at this point, as well as several other ways. Don't forget, and I'll pin this in the comment section, so check it if you haven't already, the spreadsheet that we have that lists where every officer in the game is and how to source them. So check the comments for that list. If you have any questions, though, hit me up. I'm more than happy to help you out. That's what I run on all my accounts, but particularly the 2 that y'all see on every stream. Live long and plunder. Stay safe with the Space Cowboys. Deuces, that's me. Catch you on the next one, and we're out.
An even better outro than the intro. For the Empire and glory to your house.